Hello everyone, welcome to Megafoon Sport. It's my privilege to welcome Werner Frost here. We're going to have a discussion about the best 5 fly-halves in Springbok history. We had a video earlier this week where a lot of people got very heated. The debate got very heated, and Werner and I thought it a good idea to have a discussion about who the actual top 5 is. Hello, Werner.
Morning, MV. It's good to be with you. Looking forward to this. I don't want to know if it's a discussion or a debate. I know there will be a lot of debate, so yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
In fairness, we decided to not just look at every single Springbok fly-half that ever played, because we can't have a subjective opinion, objective opinion about a player that we've never seen play. I mean, people mentioned Benny Osler. There's no footage of Benny Osler being available, but Donnie Craven having had so much respect for him and everything else. So we can't honestly, make a call on that. So we decided to focus on the fly-halves from 1992 onwards in the professional era. And we devised a rating system with various aspects. Please tell us about that. What did we decide to focus on in terms of rating these players?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It's very difficult. You hear about these players from the amateur era, like a Benny Osler or a Piet Versaghi, or a Jannie Barnard, and guys who are legendary, but there's nothing really to go on apart from stories that have been told about these great players. So with the footage available and stats available since 92, and sort of South Africa coming back into rugby in 1992, I agree. We almost see that as a separate era of Springbok rugby. But we really looked at all the fly-halves that played, I would say, more than 10, 15 tests for the Springboks, and we looked at goal kicking accuracy, tactical kicking, their distribution skills, how well they worked on defense, the decision making, X factor, which I think is key for a fly-half to have, and then also BMT, or big match temperament, how well they deal with pressure in high pressure games.
Like I said, we asked all our Megafoon Sport contributors and also the RadioRugby commentators, guys who are involved in rugby, and obviously yourself, to rate each player on each one of these items or what things that we looked at, and give him a rating out of 5 on each one of these. And then we added all these ratings together, and then we came up with a top 5. And you and I afterwards said to ourselves, to each other, listen, this is quite clearly to us probably the best 5 fly-halves in Springbok history.
It's interesting how it worked out, because like I said, if you have a big enough sample of people giving their opinion, and again, I think it's important for the viewers to know that this is subjective. It's opinions of multiple people, but it's interesting to see how it played out. Obviously, there were very talented players that were in the mix. We'll probably talk about them, like a Frans Steyn and a Ruan Pienaar, who were excellent Springboks, but never really played that much at fly-half. We didn't necessarily look at them, but I'm happy with the list that we came up with, the top 5. I can't argue with that. Again, always subjective, but happy to see the comments that's going to come out of this video this week, I'm sure.
Just for interest's sake, let me just read those names, the names that we considered when we looked at these fly-halves. And it starts with Naas Botha, Joel Stransky, Henny Leroux, Henry Hannibal, Jannie de Beer, Bram van Straten, Louis Koen, Jaco van der Westhuizen, Butch James, Andre Pretorius, Derek Hougaard, Ruan Pienaar, although he didn't play that many tests as a fly-half, Morne Steyn, Pat Lambie, Elton Jantjies, Andre Pollard, Damien Willemse, and Mani Libbok. Now, like you said, it's very important that people know, number one, that these are subjective opinions. It might not be something that you necessarily agree with, but you're welcome to give your comments down below. Let us hear what you have to say. And also what is important is we must make sure that we recognize the fact, like, for example, Naas only played 1 year in the 92, after 1992, or during 1992. That's the period that we're considering. Someone like Andre Pollard, for example, or Morne Steyn, played for a much longer period. So it makes it a bit more difficult to compare, but we try to nonetheless.
Yeah, I think for the Springboks, obviously Naas played mostly during the 80s, but a couple of other players, Stransky, Henny Leroux, Henry Hannibal, Jannie de Beer, they all made their provincial debuts in the late 80s. So there's a couple of them that, sort of had one foot in the amateur era, one foot in the modern era. But yeah, the criteria was from 1992 onwards. Naas played in 1992, so fair enough. Let's include him in the list.
Right, let's start with the 5th best fly-half in our list, and lo and behold, it's a tie. It's between Jannie de Beer and Joel Stransky. Was that a surprise to you?
Not necessarily where they ranked. It was interesting to see a tie. We keep saying that these lists are subjective, so I think we all have a bit of bias and automatically would put one player above the other one. But again, looking at the scoring, they ended up on the same points at 77.6%. But I think what was interesting is that there were certain aspects of Joel Stransky's game that he rated better in than Jannie de Beer. We know Jannie de Beer was a better defensive player. Joel Stransky was maybe a little bit better under BMT. There's one, very obvious example that sticks out is the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Very few players would have kicked that drop goal from set piece. It wasn't even set up. He did it from set piece. Can't remember when last I saw a fly-off do that. So Jannie de Beer also displayed, great BMT. He had some real pressure kicks. I think about that semi-final in 1999 to draw the game against Australia at Twickenham. Ultimately, we lost the test in extra time. But again, he was almost on the halfway line and kicked it over. So I think Joel was probably a little bit better distributor of the ball. I said this to you many times. We've spoken about Joel before. I don't think he always gets the credit he deserves. A lot of people remembers him just for that drop kick because it was such a big event and such a big moment in South African sport, not just in rugby. But Joel Stransky was a classic fly-off. He could kick with both feet. He was a good distributor of the ball, played well in the Natal side in the early 1990s under Ian McIntosh. I remember the 1990 Currie Cup final as a Blue Bulls fan. I'm still scarred about that final where they beat us at Loftus. But Stransky was brilliant, and he actually outplayed Nas on the day. Kicked a penalty from halfway to put the game beyond the Bulls. So a very, very well-rounded player. Again, maybe not known for his defense. Jannie de Beer was better on defense, but Joel played a little bit more in the amateur era where defense wasn't really, fly-halves weren't really known for their defense. It wasn't really part of their game until guys like Henry Honeyball later came onto the scene. So, very interesting to see that they were tied, but for various reasons, they came to the same score.
If we had to choose between the two, what would you say? Who would you pick as your actual number 5?
Yeah, this is just personal opinion. I think Joel Stransky achieved a little bit more in rugby. He had a longer career. Jannie de Beer, I remember when he came through the ranks at the Free State, he was very highly rated. Everybody thought this was going to be the guy that was going to succeed Nas in the long run. And for various reasons, it feels like he never really fulfilled his potential. He was a very, very talented player, very accurate goal kicker. But I think, if you look at the Springbok career, I think Joel Stransky achieved a little bit more. And it's, I keep saying it's not just that 95 World Cup final. If you think the opening game against Australia in 95 at Newlands, he scored in all possible ways. He scored a try, conversion, penalty goal, kicked a drop goal. He was a very, very well-rounded fly-off. So, in my personal opinion, having watched rugby for 40-odd years, I think Joel Stransky just pips it.
I agree with you. So our number 5 is Joel Stransky. We broke the tie. Yeah,
I'm happy with that.
Right, let's move on to number 4. And this is the one that Tony Brown, our new attack coach at the Springboks, made a point of saying that he emulated or tried to emulate this player. And of course, I'm talking about Henry Honeyball or Dilem, ex-Natal fly-off, Springboks fly-off. What do you think of that choice?
Very good choice. Definitely, if we look at the period since 92, I think he deserves a place on the list. He was like the silent assassin. He wasn't somebody that spoke a lot on the field. He wasn't a, very talkative guy, very quiet, and he just got on with business. Again, with Honeyball, he was known for his defense because he was so good. I specifically think of that test at Athletic Park in Wellington in 1998 when we beat the All Blacks for the first time in 17 years in New Zealand. It was such a monumental defensive effort. When last did the All Blacks just score 3 points at home? And between him, Peter Miller, Andre Snyman, they were really leading the defense. And I just remember our very vivid memories of Honeyball just cutting that All Black backline down to size. So yes, defensively, very, very strong. Different type of player than a Joel Stransky or a Jannie de Beer that we just spoke about. But What is underrated is his distribution skills. He was a beautiful, silky passer of the ball. The centers that played outside of him often scored a lot of tries. I specifically think about that 1997 European tour and the games against France. And that second test against France at the Parc de France, in the first minute, he put Andre Snyman into the gap for a beautiful try. And that just sort of set the tone for the test. And I vividly remember Honeyball scoring the last test in that, the last try in that test. And as he went over the line, he was still trying to look for someone to pass the ball to. So, you know, he had soft hands on top of his defensive skills. Kicking, maybe a little bit inconsistent. Admittedly, he wasn't a renowned kicker. There were tests that he kicked really well. Again, on that 97 European tour, also in the 96 tour to France and Argentina, he kicked fairly well. But he struggled, for instance, in the 97 series against the Lions. And we know that, you know, kicking ultimately cost us the series. So maybe a little bit inconsistent on the kicking side, but very, very strong in defense. And he was great at putting his outside backs into space.
Now, the one thing that we didn't rate him that highly on was X Factor. And when I talk about X Factor, I always picture in my mind that little kick pass that Marnie Libbok made against Scotland, for example, in the World Cup. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about when I'm talking about X Factor. Is it fair to him to say that he didn't have that much of an X Factor, much more of a solid, reliable player, rather than one that's going to make, cause a huge upset by doing something spectacular?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between vision and X Factor. You know, X Factor is creating something out of nothing, or, you know, doing something magical like a Marnie Libbok kick pass. Honeyball had vision, but I agree with you, probably wasn't known as an X Factor player. But you have to think about where he played and how Natal played. You know, he played for Natal in the 90s under Ian McIntosh, and Mac was renowned for bringing in this thing called direct rugby. And his philosophy was, if we get over the advantage line continuously, eventually end up over the goal line. And that was really his game plan. So Honeyball played really flat. He was often the ball carrier because he was a tall guy and a strong guy. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say he didn't have X Factor, but I also think he was constrained a little bit about that game plan that Natal employed in the 1990s. But in saying that, he had enough vision to put his outside backs into space. You know, Andre Snyman scored a lot of tries in the 90s in that Springbok backline. And Honeyball was a big contributor to putting those players into space.
And Honeyball under Nick Mallet, as opposed to Honeyball under Ian Mack, what was the difference?
Well, I think he brought a lot of calmness to that Springbok side. You know, he was really the what's the word? What's the English for middlepunt? You know, it was sort of the center of that backline in the 1990s. Look, Nick Mallet coached a different game, and I think the Springboks under Mallet, yes, 98, they were very, very good, but when he came into the fold in 97, they scored a lot of tries. We put record scores on France, Scotland, England in 97, Italy, all record scores at the time. And Honeyball was really, you know, he was the center of that attacking backline. So I think Mallet changed him into even more of an attacking player than Ian Mack did.
Just as a matter of interest, we said earlier that Joel and Yanni de Beer scored 77.6%, and we're putting these decimal points in because that's how close it is, actually. Honeyball we rated at 78.4%, so it's pretty damn close for the number 4, number 5. But now we're getting to the number 3, 2, and 1 position, and there's a big gap between number 4 and number 3.
Yeah, big gap. It's a big jump. So in the third spot, we've got Morné Steyn, which I think, you know, is valid. If we look at the top 3 versus the rest of the players on the list, these are guys that really played a lot of tests, you know, at fly-half. Morné Steyn played over 50 tests, starting more than 50 tests at fly-half. And, you know, he was Mr. Consistency for, I would say, almost, well, over a decade, because he only retired in 2021. But yeah, I think he deserves a spot in the top 5. Again, it might be debatable where he fits into the list. A lot of people will probably rank him higher. A lot of people might think, you know, it was a little bit more one-dimensional. But what was interesting about Morné Steyn, he was a very consistent kicker. Everybody knows this. He kicked some very, very important kicks. 2009 Currie Cup semi-final for the Bulls against Western Province at Newlands. kicked a penalty from the halfway line to win it for the Bulls. Ultimately, they won the Currie Cup, that series against the British Lions in 2009, to win the series from the halfway in only I think that was only his second test. He came onto the field, scored all the points against the All Blacks in Durban in 2009, all 31 points. And then obviously 2021 British Lions, he did it again. They picked him, brought him into the squad, and he kicked that penalty again. So he's very well known for kicking pressure kicks and making sure that the scoreboard ticks over. But when he started out as a youngster at the Bulls, I remember Derek Hougaard was already on the scene. He was very much known as a renowned kicker and a kicker within the team. And Morné Steyn was sort of the opposite. He was seen as a running, distributing type of fly-half who played really flat. And it was only really the influence from a guy like Flock Sillier, who was the Bulls kicking coach, that turned Morné into the kicking machine that he later became. So he wasn't known in under 21 rugby as a kicking fly-half at the Bulls, but that was sort of coached into him. But testament to his hard work that he put in over years. I think the biggest way we can sum up Morné Steyn is consistency. You always knew what you were going to get from him. Maybe not the flashiest player. I think people will say that he probably didn't get his backline away as much as a guy like Henry Honeyball did, for instance. But he always got the team in the right position on the field. Tactically, his kicking was spot on. And he kept the pressure on the opposition with his kicking. But yeah, that we went with Morné at number 3. And I think he deserves his spot on the list.
What's important about Morné, we talked briefly about that when we spoke about choosing between Joel Stransky and Jannie de Beer, is longevity. It's important to point out here that Morné had a career of more than 20 years. And we know him and Ruan Pienaar used to play at school against each other. I mean, that's how long ago was that? And Ruan has also announced that he's going to retire. That's one of the biggest things about being a great player rather than just a good player, is being a great player over a long period of time where you always deliver. You have these people or players that have a bit of a flash in the pan and they have a brilliant season or two and then they just disappear. And there's plenty of those examples that we can talk about. But I think that, for me, is one of the standout things of Morné Steyn, is his absolute consistency over an extended period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Longevity is a big thing in rugby. When you talk about the greats of rugby, whether it's in world rugby or in any position, you have to look at guys who did it season in, season out, consistently every year. They were going to be top of their game, and Morné was there. Maybe not the greatest fly-half that we've ever had, but again, like I said, you always knew what you were going to get from him. He won't let you down. If the pressure is on, if you had one guy to pick to kick a penalty from the halfway line to win a game, I think until Pollard did it in 2023, he probably would have picked Morné Steyn 9 times out of 10. He was that good. But yeah, great longevity. Played with Ruan in 2002 and then the Craven Week for Free State. So yeah, he's been in rugby for a 20-year career. That, again, in the modern era, that doesn't happen.
Right, guys, time for the number 2 and number 1 position. And this was, I can't describe to you how close this was. It's 86.1% for the guy who ended up in the number 2 spot, and 86.5% for the guy that we decided is going to be the best fly-half. It's that close. Werner, tell us, who was number 2?
Number 2, this is a difficult one for me. People who know me and who know the channel knows this was my childhood hero growing up. Naas is one of the reasons why I love rugby and why I still have a passion for it today. But yeah, Naas Botha at number 2. This is a tricky one, and I think we just need to talk about why he's in this position. I think if we ever have a discussion about who the all-time greatest Springbok fly-halves are, from 1891 up until now, he might just pip it and be top of the list. But if we really look at the period 1992, I think it makes sense to probably have him second on the list, because he only played in 1992, only played 5 tests that year, played well. He was Springbok captain in 1992, so that does qualify him according to our criteria. Happy with him in the top 5, obviously. And Naas, for me, was absolutely the complete fly-half. I know he gets criticized, and to this day, he divides opinion. In the 80s, you either loved or hated Naas. It was that simple. If you didn't live in Pretoria and you didn't support Northern Transvaal, you weren't a fan. But at the Bulls, we absolutely loved him. I know Donnie Craven described him as a genius, you know, and one of his top 5 rugby players that he's ever seen play. So that says a lot. Defensively is probably the one part of Nas's game where he does get criticized, but I've got a very strong opinion about this. For me, no fly-off really was known as a tackling fly-off in the 80s. Give me one player that played fly-off for a decade that was known and renowned for tackling. You know, you can look at a De Vetras, a Skalk Nordia, these guys who played in the 80s. None of them stood out as defensive fly-offs. So it really wasn't part of any fly-offs game. There might be an argument for somebody like a Michael du Plessis, who played some games for Western Province at 10. He was a very aggressive player. You know, he could tackle, but he was more of an inside center. So for me, it's a moot point. I don't get the argument of saying Nas was a bad defender. You know, he wasn't a strong tackler, but tell me what use would Nas be at a bottom of a ruck? That isn't where he played his best rugby. You know, you need him on his feet to get the team out of trouble. And I think that's where his defensive play stood out. You know, if you were on your own try line and you had to get out of your own half, Nas would put the ball back 50 meters and win some good field position for the team. He also put, you know, opposition teams under severe pressure with his tactical kicking. On his passing game, again, I think people have a very limited, knowledge of Nas's game. Nas was a fantastic distributor of the ball. He had one of the best passing games, and there will be a real rugby video in future where I just focus on Nas's running and passing game. That's in the works. Having personally spoken to guys like Donnie Gerber, you know, Donnie will be the first defender of Nas and say, you know, he's the guy who gave me the ball. He put me into space and I scored all those tries. So there's enough evidence of Nas being a really good passer of the ball. But obviously when it comes to kicking, I don't think anyone really compares. He could kick equally well off of both feet. I can vividly remember him kicking drop goals off his left foot. Very few players were able to do that. Tactically, he just knew how to get the team in the right field. You know, a couple of games that I have to mention here, Imvia, is the 1980 series against the British Lions. The Springboks were up 2-0 in the series. In the third test in Boet Erasmus, it was pouring with rain. It was wet. It was muddy. Gerrie Germensay scores a try in the left-hand corner to make it 10-all. And Nas calmly kicks the conversion in pouring rain from the touchline with a wet leather ball to win the series. And I can remember the ball falling over and him calling Donnie Gerber over to come and hold the ball up. And he would direct Gerber and tell him, you know, put the ball a little bit more left, tilt it a little bit more right until he had it just perfect and he kicked it. It was unbelievable to see. The 81 series against the All Blacks, I think that's where he really made his name internationally because, you know, it was an overseas tour. In New Zealand, they actually absolutely revered Nas, and they, to this day, still have a lot of respect for him. The game against Auckland, the second test against the All Blacks in Wellington, where he scored 20 of the 24 points. He really dismantled the All Blacks almost single-handedly. The 1985 Lion Cup game against Western Province, again in a soaking wet Newlands, scored all the points. In 1986, he became Springbok captain against the New Zealand Cavaliers. In the first test at Newlands, again, the game was deadlocked at 15-all. Right at the end of the game, in pouring rain again, seems like that's when Nas played his best rugby, was when the conditions were against him. But he got hold of a low pass and kicked the ball into the corner for Carl du Plessis, who scored. And again, he kicked the conversion from the touchline to put the result beyond doubt. The 87 Currie Cup final is legendary, where he almost single-handedly beat the Transvaal side. And then, you know, everybody remembers Jannie de Beer's 5 drop goals against England, but Nas was actually the first player to kick 5 drop goals. He did it against Natal in 1992 in his last season in the Currie Cup. So the list of games where he just completely, I almost want to say, ran the show and dictated the flow of the game is quite, you know, I've only given a couple of examples, but there's many more I can think of. So I've spoken more about Nas than any other fly-off. I think it's quite obvious why I am a big fan, but I think he definitely deserves a spot, at least at number 2. I think if we ever have a conversation about the all-time greatest fly-offs, you know, then it's a different debate. Then I might have a different opinion. But I think since 92, happy to have Nas in the second spot.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that, what good is Nas lying at the bottom of the ruck there? And one of the aspects that we considered was decision-making and strategic vision, or as you want to call it that. And Nas was head and shoulders above any of the other players on this list for me in that respect. We rated him the highest for all the fly-offs that we looked at. And that's where Nas made a difference. He always knew where to kick to. He always knew where to be to receive the ball back and the likes. That kind of a rugby brain is not really something that you find all that often in a fly-off lately.
Yeah, it is something that sort of is not in the game. Nas played rugby as a professional in an amateur era, so it's definitely something that he worked on actively. But his decision making, I think, this is a different player. He didn't play fly-off, but between him and Fourie de Pre, it's probably the two players that I think on the field tactically makes the best decisions or made the best decisions for the Springboks. So you're right. Nas knew when he should take control of the game. There was a lot of times, where he just told the forwards, give me the ball. Just give me the ball. I will make sure we get in the right place on the field. But again, with his passing game, I think people remember him as a kicker because he did it so well, but he knew when to kick and he knew when to pass, and he did play the percentages. He wouldn't have run necessarily out of his own half. It's like, get the team in the opposition half of the field, and then we can play some attacking rugby, and I think his decision making was probably the best out of any South African fly-off.
Right, that brings us to number one, and no prizes for guessing who it's going to be. Go ahead and tell us, please.
Number one, no surprise. I think it's Andre Pollard, but again, like you say, the margin between him and Nas was very, very tight. Two players in different eras, obviously decades apart. Pollard having just won 2 World Cups. He won a Junior World Cup while still at school. He was in Paul Gymnasium in 2012, and he won a Junior World Cup. British and Irish Lions series in 2021. So, his list of accolades is quite long, and I don't think he's done yet. I think he's got another World Cup in him. I hope so. I hope we see him in Australia in 2027. Two players from different eras, but I think Pollard deserves it. Injury has actually curtailed his career quite a bit. I think he could have played more tests, but we looked at all the sort of different aspects of a fly-off that we rated these players on, and I can't find anything in Pollard's game that isn't sound. It might not be the best kicker for posts. He might not be the best tactical kicker, but he scored very, very high in every single one of those boxes. And I think his strongest component, or his strongest attribute that he brings to the game, is his BMT. I've often said this about other fly-offs. If you think about Dan Carter in 2015 and Johnny Wilkinson in 2003, I think they had such a significant impact on those two sides, England and New Zealand, winning the World Cups, that specifically Wilkinson, if Wilkinson didn't play in 2003, I don't think England would have won the World Cup. And I can say the same thing about Pollard. If he didn't come back from injury in 2023, I think somebody else would have won the World Cup. I think he was that crucial to our cause. As good as the Springboks were, he kicked 7 out of 7 kicks at goal in the quarterfinal, the semi-final, and the final. And all 3 games we won by 1 point. So that's what it came down to. It came down to Andre Pollard's ability to deal with that pressure in those big situations. And when you hear him talk about it now, he's very blasé about it. He's very chill about it. He just says, well, that's what I live for. He embraces, there's an old saying, the winner wants the ball. Winners want the ball. And Pollard's definitely that guy. As the pressure is up, give me the ball. I will win the game for you. But solid defender, big guy, strong guy, underrated in his distribution skills. I think we can, maybe do another video on how many tries the Springboks have scored with these guys at fly-off. Pollard would rank very, very high. The Springboks have always scored a lot of tries with him at fly-off. But, if you think about what he's done over the last sort of 11 seasons, 10 seasons in the Springbok jersey, under 20 World Cup winner in 2012, that test he played, his first test he played against the All Blacks in 2014 at Ellis Park, scored 2 tries, really put him on the map. We won that test. It was the first time in 3 years that we beat the All Blacks that year. I think the World Cup semi-final in 2015, we narrowly lost to the All Blacks, but again, he kicked all his goals and really showed, what he's made of. The 2019 semi-final against Wales, again, it came down to a kick. It was very, very tight against a very strong Welsh side. He kicked the penalty in the dying minutes. We won that game, and he played exceptionally well in the final. And then, of course, what do we say about 2023? It was just absolutely brilliant. And I always said before this World Cup, there were a couple of injuries. Lood de Jager was injured, Lucanio Am was injured, and Pollard was injured. And I said, out of those three, we only need Pollard. We only need Pollard. We can do without the other guys, as great as they are. But and I think that, you know, that was true. So in his all-round game, I can't fault him, to be honest. He's brilliant. And by the time he retires, you know, I think people will remember him sort of in the same sphere as somebody like Nas or maybe a Dan Carter, maybe not quite a Dan Carter. He was something special, but Pollard's up there. He's, for me, a world-class player, and I'm more than happy to, you know, have him at number one.
Yeah, like you said, he's got absolutely no weak points. The only thing that he might not score as highly as any of the others is maybe the X factor, but it doesn't matter. That BMT side of him that's so strong makes all the difference. You mentioned that he was injured quite often, and the day when they announced the Springbok squad for the World Cup and he wasn't there, I felt exactly the same as you did. And for him to come back from injury in the middle of a World Cup, you know, not even having started the tournament, and then make such a big difference, actually effectively winning us the last three most important games of the tournament, goes to show, you know, how big this BMT of his actually is. He's really, he's got ice in his veins, to put it bluntly.
He does, but he's always had that. You know, I remember very vividly years ago, he was still a 20-year-old at Loftus, and I had some work that I did with the Blue Bulls Rugby Union, and I saw him at the Union. He had a gravitas to him. You know, he acted like a leader when he was still 20 years old. He's never intimidated by anything. He's not intimidated by more senior players. He's not intimidated by the occasion. You know, he's, the best way to describe it is ice in his veins. He just embraces it, and I think that makes him a better player. X factor, sure, yeah, maybe he doesn't have the X factor of somebody like Imani Lebok, who can create something magical. With all respect to Mani, who I think is a great flyer, you know, if we had to kick a penalty against France in the quarterfinal, a late penalty from the halfway line against England in the semi-final just to get us to the final, I wouldn't have put my money on Mani. He was, you know, inconsistent in the World Cup, and I think that's the difference between a good player and a great player. I will take a pragmatic, by the book, solid fly-off with BMT over an X-Factor player any day of the week. That's my personal opinion, because that guy will act as a general. He will make the right decisions on the field. He will get the forwards in the right position on the field. Might not be too flashy, but he'll do his job, and he'll do it perfectly, and he'll lead from the front. And I absolutely see that in Pollard. So yeah, I have no qualms about it. I agree. I think if we look at the last 30 odd years from 1992, Pollard's the man.
Well, guys, there you have it. Love to hear your opinions on this. I'm sure we're going to get a barrage of comments down below, but you're welcome to state your opinion, motivate why you think you might be differing from us, or why you don't agree with us. We'd love to start a debate around this. Werner, thanks, man. That was interesting and illuminating to a degree.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I can talk about this stuff all day long. So looking forward to maybe do something similar in the future about other positions. But thanks for having me, Envy, as always. It's great to chat to you. And yeah, happy to have a debate with anyone. And let's see what the comments say about our selection of the top 5 fly-offs. But thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks. I appreciate your time. And guys, we're going to be doing this a bit more. We're going to do more positions, and we're going to build up eventually to a best Springbok team after we've discussed everybody. But it's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. But you're welcome to let us know what you think. And watch out for other videos. We have a lot. We talked about we talked to James Dalton about his Springbok career, where the name Bullet came from, and how he was forced out of the World Cup. Make sure you don't miss that. And we'll see you again soon.